Welcome, I'm Claudia Clars, and this is the Oria Document. Today we will primarily talk about fashion and its defining role. Fashion history is much more than just the change of clothing. It is in fact a reflection of society's self-expression, values, and identity. Clothing was originally a clear status symbol. In earlier times, it was immediately possible to read from someone's attire which social class they belonged to, what their financial situation was, or what role they played within the community. The nobility, the bourgeoisie, and the working classes were clearly distinguished, and clothing often said more about a person than their personality itself. In the 19th century, this system still functioned very strictly. Clothing was not only an aesthetic matter, but also a social code. From a single outfit, one could read a person's position, occupation, and rank. However, with the development of cities, the rise of the bourgeois class gradually began to loosen these boundaries. Later, with social development and industrialization, fashion began to democratize. By the early and mid-20th century, fashionable clothing became accessible to a much wider range of people, no longer being the privilege of the upper classes. Clothing gradually became a tool of self-expression as well, not just a marker of social status. In the 1920s and 1930s, the influence of modern urban lifestyle emerged. Women's fashion, for example, changed radically, with simpler and more practical forms appearing, reflecting changes in lifestyle itself. At this point, fashion truly began to become a cultural language. After the Second World War, a strong period of cultural and economic growth began, peaking in the 1950s and 1960s. This era is often considered the age of clean, elegant, and structured appearance. Men typically wore well-groomed, clean-shaven, suit-based styles, while women's fashion emphasized refined, orderly, and highly structured aesthetics. Fashion at this time reflected stability, social order, and predictability. In the 1970s and 1980s, however, a completely different direction emerged. Younger generations increasingly opposed earlier rules. Counterculture movements, punk, rock, and various expressive styles appeared, where fashion was no longer about conformity, but about rebellion and identity. Clothing became a kind of voice against society. In the 1990s and 2000s, globalization and mass culture made fashion more uniform, while the dominance of a casual style emerged. Jeans, t-shirts, and sneakers became standard, and visual differences between social classes significantly decreased. Clothing became less of a status marker and more of a lifestyle choice. In recent decades, however, fashion has increasingly shifted away from formal elegance toward a more relaxed, everyday, and often intentionally simple-looking direction. Today, it is not uncommon for television presenters, bloggers, or reporters to appear in very casual clothing, something that would have been unthinkable in public life in earlier times. This is often justified by a sense of authenticity or approachability, but it raises the question, where is the line between elegance and negligence? It is important to understand that changes in fashion cannot be explained solely by the fast-paced world. Although accelerated lifestyles, digital culture, and social media have strongly influenced clothing habits, cultural and identity-based transformations have also taken place. Modern individuals increasingly prioritize individuality, freedom, and comfort over conformity to social expectations. An interesting phenomenon is that compared to the 1980s and 1990s, when a clean-shaven and well-groomed appearance was the norm for men, a more natural and raw style has now returned. Beards, for example, are not only a fashion trend, but also a form of self-expression, or even a status symbol. Fashion, therefore, constantly changes, but the underlying question remains the same. What do we want to communicate about ourselves to the world? And is simplicity truly the absence of elegance, or are we witnessing the emergence of a new form of social self-expression? Perhaps the most interesting characteristic of the present era is that fashion simultaneously tries to return to classical elegance while pushing toward complete informality. This duality shows that society is currently in a phase of identity searching. It desires both structure and freedom, order and self-expression. On a deeper level, fashion may never have been about clothing at all, but about how humans try to relate to themselves and the world. Every era's clothing is a kind of mirror. It does not only show who we are, but also who we want to be, or what we wish to hide. Societies have always sought a balance between order and freedom, and this balance is reflected in fashion as well. When the need for order is stronger, clothing becomes more structured and regulated. When individuality comes to the forefront, forms break apart and style becomes more personal and fragmented. Perhaps this is why fashion never evolves in a straight line, but rather moves in cycles. What was once a strict rule later becomes rebellion, and over time returns again, but with a different meaning. And perhaps the most important question is not what counts as elegant or inelegant, but who defines it, and what era's spirit speaks through us when we dress ourselves. Ultimately, fashion is nothing more than humanity's continuous attempt to make the invisible visible. Identity, uncertainty, and the ongoing search we call the self. This was the Oria Document, and I am Claudia Clars. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to share your thoughts or reflections with us. For more content, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for your attention. We will meet again soon. Until then, I wish you all the best.